Hello everybody, and welcome back to another card game tutorial video. In this video we're going to be working on adding animations for Pokemon in our game. For instance, when we set a card in the battlefield position, we're going to have a Pokeball come to the field and release that Pokemon. And we're also going to do that for the opponent as well. And then we're also going to create different animations depending on the situation. For instance, if I were to evolve Squirtle into Wartortle, we'll see that he'll evolve by fading in. However, if I switch the Pokemon for another Pokemon, like Squirtle, the Pokeball should retract and then come back in the field and release the new Pokemon. In this video, we'll also be programming the Switch trainer card in our game. And we'll also be addressing a few bug fixes from the last video. So if you enjoy this series, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support this series and be able to download these program files, be sure to check out my Patreon, linked in the description below. So when it comes to bug fixes, what we need to do is, in the last video, when we created the code for defeating Pokemon, we did not add the code to set it to the discard pile. But we did create an alarm for our field card objects to move the field card to the discard pile and then add it whenever we used the trainer card Scoop Up or Pokemon Center. So we're going to utilize that to send it to the discard pile after it's been defeated. As you can see, it is not there. Now, another issue we have is when we try to look at the opponent's Pokemon card pile on the field, and we select one of the cards in that pile, it crashes the game. This happens because there is a condition in the opponent field card that we have removed in a previous video, but it tends to come back every time I do a new video. So this condition right here crashes the game. So in order to fix that, all we need to do is remove this condition. Now, another issue that was caused from the last video is with this new condition where the health points equals the damage counters, this causes an error when we create a field card for all of the cards in the pile and send them to the discard pile. For instance, when we use Squirtle here and we add cards to his pile, when we use Scoop Up, field card objects are generated for all of the cards in the pile. And with this new condition we've added here, when the health points equals the damage counters, we manipulate the player's field at the position we set for these field cards. The problem is the health points that energy cards and trainer cards have is 0. So when the field card objects are created, automatically their health points equal their damage counters. When that happens, we set the player field at their position we give them to equal 0, but we set their positions to equal the negative value of their card pile. And that can be seen in the script discard field card pile here at line 10. So when this computes, we are setting a negative number for these arrays, which crashes our game. So in order to do that, we want to make sure that this only computes when the field card is a Pokemon card. So that solves that problem. But now in order to utilize that alarm we created when defeating a Pokemon, we want to change the code within this condition. And the alarm, it destroys the object for us, so we'll no longer need this. What we will need to do is call the alarm so that it begins sending the card to the discard pile. And we're going to do that by using the condition if alarm 0 is equal to -1, we're going to set alarm 0 equal to 3. And when this happens, we want to make sure that the main card on that pile is above the rest of the cards. So we're going to force its depth to be larger than any card on the field. So we're going to set that equal to -400. But we also want to create a field card for each card in this pile. So we're going to reutilize the script called discard field card pile so that the main card is animated to the discard pile and all of the cards in the pile will be as well. But since we're creating new field card objects for the cards in the pile, we no longer want to draw the Pokemon cards in the pile how we have it here. So we want to add a condition here that will prevent those cards from being printed when this alarm is called. So in the condition, if it is a Pokemon, we're going to add a new condition. And that condition will be, and alarm 0 is equal to -1. So that will prevent them from being printed. But one thing I want to change in this script call is in here we set the alarm to equal 10. But with this, it will make the main card on the pile reach the discard pile way before all of the cards in that field positions pile. So we want them all to go at the same time. So we're going to change this 10 to a 2. So now let's make sure our changes worked. So I'm going to set Squirtle down and add a few cards to his pile. And on the opponent side, I'm going to try to select one of those pile cards. And as you can see, it does not mess up the game. Now, when I use Scoop Up, that also does not mess up the game. So we fixed that. But now let's see what happens when this Pokemon is defeated. So if I press enter enough times, you'll see that it is now sent to the discard pile and it's animated as well. So now that we have that, let's get into the topic of this video. And with that topic, we're going to add some new sprites. And all of these sprites will be Gifs. So the first sprite we're going to add is going to be the Pokeball animation when being thrown onto the field. And we're going to call that SPR_throwing Pokeball. And the image we're going to use for that is going to be this one right here. And all of these images I will put in a Google document and publish it on my Twitter and Patreon. But one thing to note before that, I do not own the rights to any Pokemon images, and that this is only used for educational purposes. So for this Pokeball, we want its origin to be in the middle center. And we also want to change its width to be 70 and its height to be 66. Now the next sprite we're going to add is going to be called SPR Open Pokeball. And this is going to be used whenever the Pokemon is being summoned or defeated. And it's going to look like this. The origin is going to be in the middle center, and it already is 70 by 66 pixels, so we don't need to change that. The next one we're going to add is going to be SPR_missing_no. And we're going to use this sprite for all of the Pokemon sprites we don't have. So for this video, we're only going to be utilizing Squirtle, Wartortle, Blastoise, and Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard. So for all the other Pokemon we don't have, they're going to be represented by missing no. And we want his width and height to be on to be 100 by 100. And we're going to choose this sprite's origin to be down here towards the bottom. And then we will lock it. Now, the next sprites we're going to add are going to be of the Pokemon. So the first one I want to do is going to be the sprite for Squirtle when he is idle. So I'm going to call that SPR_Squirtle_still. And that's going to look like this. So when I play that, you'll see that it's just Squirtle standing still. Now, I'm going to set its origin at the lower abdominal area of Squirtle. And I'll do this for all of the other Pokemon too. And then I will lock it. Now, the next thing I want to show you is an issue I had to deal with when uploading these sprites. So the next one we're going to upload is going to be called Squirtle Attack. Now, the GIF I'm going to use for this is going to be this Blastoise. And this is to show you what can happen when the game renders the GIF you've uploaded improperly. So if I press the play button, you're going to see that every frame of this Blastoise animation is printed onto the GIF, unlike this Squirtle GIF. And the reason why I found this to happen is because the GIF that I took from Google is too large for Gamemaker to render it properly. So in order to do this, I had to utilize a website called Giphy.com. I uploaded the image by dragging the Blastoise GIF into the website, uploading it, and then downloading it by pressing this media button. And when you do that, you get the option to download the source size, the social size, which is 10 megabytes or less, or you can download it as an MP4 or even smaller. Now, the one we're going to utilize is social. So if I press download, it will download the file, it will download the GIF to be under 10 megabytes. And I found when I uploaded it afterwards, it worked the way I wanted it to. So this is the Blastoise GIF I downloaded from Giphy. And now when I press play, you'll see that it no longer prints every frame of the GIF. So if you run into this issue, that is the solution. Now, the GIF I'm going to upload for this sprite will be Squirtle Attack. And that looks like this. Now, the next sprite I'm going to upload is going to be a bit tricky. And this is going to be SPR_Wartortle_still. Now, I could not find a good enough one for this. So what I had to do is I took the Wartortle attack move, which looks like this, and I cut a few of the frames out to make it look like Squirtle sways back and forth. So when you upload this, you're going to have to do the same thing that I'm about to do. So when that happens, when you have a GIF in your game, it exports it to the project file. So if I go here and I go to sprites and I go down to my animations, you'll see that within here it has a bunch of these sub images of that animated GIF. So what I did was I took the ones I wanted and numbered them in a way where when I take all of them and import them into the sprite like such, if you hold shift down, if you click the first sub image, hold shift down and then click the last one, it will add them all. So when I click open and I press play, you'll see that War Turtle sways back and forth. And this looks a little fast, so if I change the speed to 10, you'll see that he sways just a little bit slower. So now I'm going to upload the rest of these sprites the same way I did the Squirtle still sprite. Now, one thing I didn't do with these sprites is I did not select its origin. So I'm going to do that for these. So now that we have all the sprites uploaded, now we want to create all of the variables we will be using for these new changes. And those variables will be, we are going to initialize a move select variable we previously had in the field card object into our object player, because now we want that to be dictated by the player object. So we're going to create a Pokeball for the player object, and with that Pokeball object, we are going to set its player variable to equal the player object. We're going to set its X and Y positions, which are the positions we want it to appear on the field, to 256 by 399. We're going to set its initial X and Y values to be the room width divided by 2, and the room height plus the card height, just so it appears in the center of the room, just outside of the view. And those are going to be the same values we're going to set for the X and Y return values. So when the Pokemon is summoned, the Pokeball will move to these positions, and when that Pokemon is defeated, it'll move to this position. Now, since we're using the same sprites for both the player object and the opponent object, we're going to need to flip the sprites for one of them. And the way that the sprites print out, it makes sense to mirror it in the player object. So for the Pokeball in the player object, we're going to set its X scale value equal to -1, just so it mirrors it. The next variables we're going to create are these switches here. And these are going to be used to dictate the logic in the Pokeball object. So the switch is a value that is asserted when the switch trainer card is used, and the evolve switch is initiated when the Pokemon has been evolved. And I'll explain these later in the video. But now we want to do the same thing for the opponent object. And the variables for the opponent object are going to be very similar. We're going to create a Pokeball object called ball1. But within that object, we're going to set its player variable equal to the opponent object, and its X and Y positions and the X and Y return positions will be different. And we're also going to initialize the switches and the move select within this object, just like we did in the player object. The next thing we want to do is force our player object to start with the cards we want to test. And those cards are going to be Switch, Squirtle, War Turtle, and a few trainer cards. So we're going to change our beginning hand here. So now that we have that, let's create the Pokeball object. And we're going to call this obj_Pokeball. And we're going to set its sprite to equal the throwing Pokeball sprite we created earlier. And within the create event of that Pokeball, we're going to have the following lines of code. We're going to have a script call to initiate the still Gifs we added, and we're going to have a script call to initiate the attack Gifs. And then we're also going to have this temp character number that we're going to utilize later in the video. So the first thing we want to do is create these initialization scripts. So we're going to create an array of still sprites, just like we did for all of the Pokemon card sprites. And we're going to call that array sprite_still. And we're going to go through all of the cards in the set, which is 102, and force their still sprites to equal the missing number sprite. And that's so we can initialize only the sprites we have. And the sprites we have are the Squirtle sprites that we're going to use for Squirtle, the Charmander sprites that we're going to use for the Poliwrath evolution line, and since we are already uploading the Charmander sprites, we're also going to set the Charmander Pokemon numbers to equal those sprites as well. Now it looks like I misspelt the Squirtle still sprite, so let's make that change. And it looks like I swapped the T and the L. So when I make that change, we'll see that the text color changes. And we're going to do the same thing for the attack Gifs initialization. So we're going to call this one spr_init_attack_Gifs. And we're just going to copy over the same code from the other script, except we're going to Control F all of the places still is written in this script, and we're going to change it to attack. And that's all we will need to do for this script call. So now we want to work on the step event of the Pokeball object. And if I go back to the create event, it looks like I misspelt the script call for the attack Gifs, and it looks like I put SPR instead of SCR. So let's make that change. As you can see, the color of the text has changed. So now we can go to the step event. And in the step event, we're going to add the following two conditions. But we're going to ignore this one for now. So what's going on here is if the value at position 0 for the player's field is greater than 0, we want to move the Pokeball from its current position to the position on the field we want it to be. And whenever the Pokeball is moving, we want to make sure that the object is above all of the other objects. So we're going to change its depth equal to -1100. And we're only going to do that when we're moving it from its current position to the desired position. So that's only going to be in this condition. And if it's not there yet, we're going to move it there. And then once it gets there, we're going to force its X and Y position to equal the X and Y position we want it to be at. We're going to set its speed to 0, and we're going to force its depth back to 0. And then if that value at position 0 on the field is not greater than 0, which means there is no Pokemon there, we're going to move it from its current position to the return position we want it to be. And then the rest of the code will be exactly the same, with the exception of this condition here we are going to ignore for now. So in order to see what that looks like, we're going to test our game. So now that we have the game loaded up, if I set Squirtle down on the field, we're going to see the Pokeball move from outside of the screen towards the center of the screen where we want the Pokemon to appear. And since we did this for both the player object and the opponent object, and our opponent object is just a reflection of our player object, you'll see it will also happen on the other side of the field. But now when this card is removed from the field, you'll see that the Pokeball retracts. And then when I add another card back into that position, and only that position, does the ball return. So if you see, I put Squirtle here on the bench, but the Pokeball does not come out. Only when I set the Pokemon in the 0 position of the field. But now we want to have the Pokemon we are summoning to appear outside of the ball. So what we need to do that is add the following condition. And that condition will be if the X and Y position equal the X and Y position that we want the Pokemon to appear, if that field position is greater than 0, we're going to set the sprite index to equal the still sprite of the Pokemon at that position. And if it's not greater than 0, we're going to change the sprite index back to the Pokeball sprite. So what that will look like is this. So if I set Squirtle onto the field, the Pokeball will go, and then Squirtle will just snap into place. And then when I put Wartortle on the field, you'll see that Wartortle appears, and he's moving kind of quickly. So we'll change his sprite speed to be a little slower so it doesn't look like this. But now that we have this, we want to have the card sprite do the attack animation. So let's do that. So first I'm going to go to my Wartortle sprite for when he stands still. I'm going to change his speed to 10, and then I'm going to go back to my Pokeball object and add a condition within the if player field position is greater than 0 condition that says if the move select variable is greater than 0, we're going to force the sprite object to be the attack sprite for as many frames as that attack animation has. And if it is not, we will then change it back to the still sprite. So what's happening here is if the player move select value is greater than 0, we're going to create a local variable sprite that is equal to the attack sprite of the Pokemon in that position. And then we're going to create another local variable called sprite length, and we're going to set that value to equal the number of frames this sprite has, just so the alarm we use to change the sprite back to its still sprite can be just as long as that sprite has frames, so it will only play through one time. But since we have the missing no sprite, which only has 1 frame, we want to set the alarm we're going to use to equal 5 if the sprite length is less than 2. Just so we don't give an alarm a negative number, because if the sprite length is greater than 2, we're going to set the sprite length, we're going to set the alarm equal to the sprite length of that GIF minus 5 frames. So if this was missing no, we would set alarm 0 to equal -6. So that's why we have this condition here. And then what we want to do is we want to force the image index of that sprite to equal 0, because Gamemaker remembers the last sub image that sprite was on the last time it played. So if we were to play the attack sub image again and it was off by a frame or more, you would see the attack animation start midway through, and we don't want that. And then once we're done setting all of that, we're going to change the sprite index to equal the sprite of the attack animation. But before we do that, we removed this move select variable from the field card object, and then we added it to the player object here. But when it comes to the field card where we had it in the step event, when we released our mouse button, we had these conditions that if the Pokemon had 2 attacks and the mouse released was within that first area of the first attack, where you would set move select equal to 1. Those in the second area, we would set move select equal to 2. But we never added the code for the Pokemon that only have 1 attack. And that code will follow the same logic as this condition, except its second X and Y values will differ. But what we need to do here is add the object designator before all of the move select variables. So I'm going to do a Control F search for move select. I'm going to press space just so I can choose the ones that don't have the array for move select, like these ones here. And then I'm going to change that text to be player period move underscore select space. And then I'm going to do the same for move select when there is a parenthesis at the end of it. And then I'll make those changes. So now we've officially added, so now we've made all the changes we need to do within the field card object in regards to the move select variable. So again, we move these variables to the player object so that in the Pokeball object, we'll only need one object designator, and that will be for the player. So now that we've done that, let's create alarm 0. So in alarm 0, after the amount of frames have passed that we set here, we're going to change the sprite index back to the still GIF. And then we're going to set the player move select variable equal to 0. Because if we didn't set this equal to 0, it will keep replaying the attack animation. Now, with this happening, we don't want anything in the step event to compute while this alarm is counting down. So we're going to add a condition at the very top that says if alarm 0 is greater than -1, return. Because if we didn't, it would continue going through here and it will force the sprite to go back to the still sprite before the attack animation has been completed. So if we've done this correctly, we should be able to see that the cards now have attack animations. So now if I set Squirtle down and I choose to attack, you'll see Squirtle do the attack animation. And if I do it again, it starts from the beginning and goes all the way through. If I do the same with War Turtle and I hit the attack, he also attacks. And as you can see, Squirtle goes a lot slower now that I changed his sprite speed. And we will do the same for Blastoise. Now you'll see that the card went away immediately. Later in the video we will change that so that it will fade away slowly. But now we want to make it to where when we set a card down or have a card defeated, we want to make it look like the Pokemon goes back into the Pokeball and then goes back to its return position. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a draw event. And in that draw event, we're going to add two conditions. And we're going to rely on two alarms. Alarm 1 and Alarm 2. And if Alarm 1 is greater than -1, we're going to change the image alpha of the Pokeball object to equal this equation. And what this is going to do is it's going to force the sprite object to look like it's fading away. And then we're going to draw this sprite open Pokeball in this at the same position, but its equation in the image alpha is going to be the opposite. So what it's going to do is it's going to fade in. So while the Pokemon is fading out, the Pokeball is fading in, and then the Pokeball will then return to its closed state and then roll away. And then we're going to do the same thing for when the Pokemon is defeated, except these two equations will be swapped. When the Pokemon is defeated, oh, I may have said this backwards. So the equation here will make the Pokemon fade in. And we're going to draw this sprite of the open Pokeball at the same position to fade outwards. So when the Pokeball reaches its destination, it's going to draw this sprite with an alpha of 1. And then as this alarm counts down, that Pokeball will begin to fade out. And as that Pokeball fades out, the Pokemon will fade in at the same place. And when the Pokemon is defeated, the same thing's going to happen, except these two equations will be swapped. The Pokemon will fade out as the open Pokeball fades in. And then when these alarms are complete, it will return back to the throwing Pokeball sprite. So what we need to do for these alarms is we need to create them. And within these alarms, we're not going to add any text because they're not going to do anything except countdown. And as long as there is some text within these alarms, they will compute. So now that we have that, we can go back to our step event and uncomment this condition out. What this is going to do is whenever the Pokeball reaches the destination on the field, it's going to call on alarm 1 and set it equal to 50. We have this condition here because if we were to leave it out, it would recall this alarm over and over again whenever the Pokeball object reaches this destination. So if we add this condition here, it will only do this for that time when the X and Y position does not equal the field X and Y position, and that will only happen the first time this else statement computes. But now we need to do it for when the Pokemon is defeated. And we're going to do that in the field card object in the step event in this condition here. And the condition we're going to add is going to be if position is 0, which is the position that dictates the Pokeball object, we're going to set the Pokeball alarm 2 equal to 50. So that whenever the Pokemon at position 0 is defeated, the Pokeball alarm 2 will be initiated. Now we also want to add this condition to the opponent field card, just so that it too will retract the Pokemon the same way that the player Pokeball does. We need to add another condition here that says if alarm 2 is greater than -1, return, because we don't want any of this to compute if we want the Pokemon to fade away. Now one thing I didn't do was in the draw event, I need to add draw_self. So now we can test it. So now if I destroy this Pokemon, you'll see that it fades away the same way. We can't see the Pokeball retract, and that's because we need to create an else statement that says if either of these aren't true, we're going to change the image alpha back to 1, because when we change it here, we need to revert it back so that we can see the sprite in its entirety. So that will fix that problem. So now that we have that, let's cut away from the Pokeball object and add a new trainer card to our game. And we're going to do that in the script trainer. And at the bottom of this script, we're going to have the following condition. If the card number is equal to 95, which is switch, we're going to utilize the temp variable. And we're going to go through all of the positions on the player's field. And if at that position is greater than 0, and it is a Pokemon, we're going to increment this temp value. And if that temp value is less than 2, we're going to return, because this card cannot be used if only one Pokemon is on the field. Then we're going to change the field select variable to equal the card number, because we utilize this to go into extra code within our game. So when field select is equal to 95, all the code that is needed to compute to do the action of this trainer card will now compute. And then we're going to remove the card from our hand. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow the player to switch the card at position 0 with any of the Pokemon at another position. So in order to do that, we need to be able to move our field card. And in order to do that, we're going to create a new event, and that's going to be a mouse left down event. And within that event, we're going to return if the game needs to be paused, and if the field select value of the player is equal to 95, and the field card object is at position 0, we're going to move the object wherever the mouse is. And just so that the card is printed above everything else, we're going to make its depth equal to -1000. So now we can move this card freely. But since we can now move this card, we need to be able to move the card back to its proper position, just like we do with our hand cards. So in the step event of the field card object, we're going to have the following condition. If alarm 0 is equal to -1, and alarm 0 is when we move the card to the discard pile, we're doing this because if alarm 0 is greater than -1 and the card should be going to the discard pile, this code here will prevent it from moving. So we only want to do this if the card is not being sent to the discard pile. And if it's not, we're going to move it back to its original position. which is the X position and Y position we set when creating the object. And we're only going to do this if the card is not selected. And whenever it gets back to its original position, we're going to force the X and Y position of the object to equal the X and Y position we want it to return to, and we're going to set its speed equal to 0. We're also going to do the same for the opponent field card because that card will also be moving. So now if we go back to the field card object step event, we're going to allow the card to be swapped whenever the mouse button is released. So we're going to add another condition here at line 103. And this is a pretty big one because this needs to do a lot. So if the field select variable is equal to 95, which means the switch card has been played, and the position at which it is at is not its own position, and it's not at its X and Y position, what we're going to do is we're going to swap the necessary values of both of those objects. For instance, the position of the two cards we're swapping will change, and so will their X and Y coordinates. So now when we swap the cards, we don't have to force them to move back to a different position. When we set their X and Y position to be different, since what we added here at the top, they will move back to their proper positions by themselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to store the field position we want the card to go to, and we're going to store the position of the field card object that is being moved. Now this message we'll go over in just a moment. So we're going to change the field card object position to be that of the one we selected. And then we're going to change its X and Y position to be the X and Y position of the new position we selected. And then with the field card we're changing it with, we're going to change its position to be that of the original field card object, and then we're going to also change its X and Y position to be that of the original field card object. And then we're going to swap the field card object variable and the field card array we've been using for our field cards. So we're going to store the main field card object, which is the one at position 0, or the one that was initially at position 0. We're going to store that into a temp object, and then we're going to set its new field card object designator to equal that of the card we're swapping it with. And then we're going to change the card that we're swapping it with to equal the field card object designator we stored in the temp object. And then we're going to do the same thing just for the field value at those positions. So that's going to be done the same exact way. And then once that's done, we're going to set our field select value back to 0. And then we're going to set the switch trainer card switch equal to true. And we'll go over this in just a little bit. But now we need to create this message. And within this message, we're going to do the same exact thing. So we're going to return if the opponent object doesn't exist. And then we're going to initialize two local variables called position 1 and 2. And then we're going to do the same exact thing here that we did in the field card object. So I don't need to go over this one more time. So now let's test this. So if I set Squirtle here, we see that he appears. I'm going to evolve him into Wartortle, and then I'm going to try to use Switch. As you can see, it doesn't allow me to use it because I only have one Pokemon on the field. And now I'm going to set Poliwag onto the field and try to use Switch. As you can see, now I can use it. So now if I take Wartortle, I should be able to move him around. But if I let go of the card outside of a position that doesn't have a field card on it, it crashes the game. So in order to do that, what I need to do is add a condition here that says and script field position is greater than -1. And then I want to add another condition here that says if the player field card value at that position does not equal no one, compute the code below. So I'm going to indent all this and end the bracket here. And one thing before we test it, I forgot to add the parentheses here. So make sure you don't forget that. So now let's test it. So now if I set Squirtle on the field, I evolve him into Wartortle, and then I switch him out for Poliwag, I can let go of Wartortle anywhere on the field. But when I let go of him over Squirtle, we'll see that now Poliwag, excuse me, I misspoke. When I let go of him above Poliwag, we will see that Poliwag moves to position 0 and Wartortle moves to the position that Poliwag was at. And we can see that Charmander is now being printed out. But in this situation, we want the Pokeball to retract when we switch the Pokemon out and then come back out with the new Pokemon. So in order to do that, we need to add another condition to our Pokeball object. And this is going to be down here. And the condition we're going to add is going to be at line 42 between the if statement, if player move select is greater than 0, and the else condition. And this condition will say if the evolve switch is false, and we'll go over this later, and the sprite index doesn't equal the throwing Pokeball, and either the sprite index does not equal the still Gif, or the player switch is equal to true, we are going to set the position at 0 to equal 0. And what that will do is if the field value at 0 is equal to 0, then it's going to change the sprite index to be the throwing Pokeball, and if the field position at 0 is equal to 0, it's going to move it back out of the field. So that's how we're going to force the Pokeball to retract whenever we use the switch trainer card. So what we're going to do is we're going to utilize that temp character number that we initialized in the beginning of the video. And if that's equal to 0, we're going to set it equal to the card number at the field position 0. And then we're going to set that position equal to 0. And then we're going to create a new alarm, and we're going to set that alarm to equal 40 frames. And at the end of that alarm, we're going to reset that field position to equal the character card number We're going to set that temp card number to equal 0 again, so whenever we need to use it, and then we're going to deassert the switch trainer card switch. So now this is going to force the field position to equal 0 whenever we play this switch card. But let me explain this part a little bit better. So whenever we switch the card or evolve the card, the sprite index will not equal the sprite index at that field position, because we haven't made it that yet here in this else statement. So in that situation, we know we're either evolving the Pokemon or we have switched it with another Pokemon. So in that case, when we are switching it, we want to do this. But if we are evolving it, we don't want to do this, which is why we have this condition here. Again, if you need me to make more sense of this, please let me know down below. So now that we have this, let's test what that will look like. If I set Squirtle down, wait for him to fade in, and then try to evolve him into Wartortle, we'll see that the ball retracts and comes back, and that's because at the time, the sprite index did not equal the still sprite of Wartortle. We'll adjust that in just a moment. But now if I try to swap him with a different Pokemon, you'll see that the player object card is destroyed and then is recreated. And another thing that happens is if we swap the cards using the switch trainer card, you'll see that the Pokemon does not fade out into the Pokeball. It just automatically retracts. So we're going to adjust that here as well. So in order to do that, in the card object, in the condition for when we evolve a Pokemon, which will be at line 48, at line 65, we're going to add the condition that says if the field position is equal to 0, we're going to send a message to the opponent telling him that we are evolving a Pokemon. We're going to set our evolve switch to equal true, and then we're going to call on the Pokeball object alarm 4, and we're going to set that equal to 40. So let's create this evolve message. Within that message, we're going to set the opponent evolve switch equal to true, and then we're going to set the opponent's Pokeball object alarm 4 to equal 40. So now we need to go to the Pokeball object and create alarm 4. And whenever this alarm is done computing, we're going to set the evolve switch equal to false. And in the draw event, we're going to add another else if condition for alarm 4 that will fade the card inward. So now when we evolve a Pokemon, the Pokeball will not retract because we set the evolve switch equal to true, and this will only happen when the evolve switch is equal to false. And then we'll have that Pokemon evolution fade in. And in order to prevent the opponent's field card from being destroyed, we need to go to the opponent object in the step event, in the for loop at line 24, that decides when a field card object is created or destroyed, and go to the first else if statement. And that says if the field position at 0 or at I is equal to 0, and there's a field card for that position, destroy it. And this is why that object gets destroyed. So in order to prevent that from happening, we want to create a condition that says only do this if the Pokeball object alarm 3 is equal to -1. So now when we test it, so now if I set Squirtle down, we will see that he appears regularly, and then if I evolve him, we'll see that War Turtle fades in. But now if I switch him with Poliwag, we'll see that the opponent object does not get destroyed. And now the last thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the Pokemon fades out whenever we switch the Pokemon out. For instance, when I switch Squirtle for Poliwag, the Pokemon automatically comes out. So in order to do that, we're going to recall on the Alarm 2 that fades out the card whenever the card is destroyed. And if you recall, none of the code below computes whenever Alarm 2 is initiated. So underneath the Alarm 3 call, we're going to create a new condition that says if Alarm 2 is equal to -1, we're going to set Alarm 2 equal to 50. But since we're doing that, and we now need to compensate for these amount of frames, we're going to change the Alarm 3 to equal 90, so that we add the amount of time we created for Alarm 2. So now if we test this, the Pokemon should fade out as it should when we switch the Pokemon out. So now if I switch Squirtle with Poliwag, we will see that Squirtle fades out before being retracted, and then the Pokeball will come back out. So that's all I wanted to go over in this video today. If you enjoy the series, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support this channel and download these program files, be sure to check out my Patreon linked in the description below. Until next time.